today I'm going to be reviewing these two sets of markers from Ohuhu, the 60 color illustration set from the Kaala series and the 96 color set from the Honolulu series. And to start, let's talk about the shape and nib quality of these markers. This is the marker from the illustration set. It has two sides, a fine tip, and the other side is what they call a slim board, but it basically looks like the chisel tip. And the pastel set marker looks like this, and it has the more traditional dual tip with brush and chisel, which is what I'm more familiar with, and I've actually used the same style of markers from other brands so I can compare better. These ones are different than the Kaala. Look how the shape is different. This is a more like uniform shape from beginning to end. It has the name and color in both ends. This one's like this, right? The chisel tip and fine tip. But they're both alcohol markers, so this means the ink is the same kind. It's just the shape and anatomy of the pens that's a little bit different. About the nibs, right off the bat, I'm not the biggest fan of the fine tip because it's hard, so like it's not flexible or bendable like the brush tip. But this just might be because I have a specific art style and I already know that this kind of tip won't really work so well for me, but maybe it will work for you. Speaking of the nibs specifically, the brush tip on the pastel set feels surprisingly high quality, and I say surprisingly because these markers are cheap, okay? The quality is really impressive. Not like impressive for the price, but like this just really good, even without considering the price. The first time I started using alcohol markers, I tried this other super cheap brand. Actually not as cheap as Ohuhu, but like cheap, you know, comparing to Copics and the like high quality well-known brands. And sometimes even with a brand new marker, the brush would kind of feel like a dry sponge like this. Look at the sponge, it just looks crackled and it just looks dry and it's just like low quality. And the ones from Ohuhu definitely don't feel like that at all. I really like the release of ink on paper and how smooth the brush feels when I color with them. They're really nice to hold. I really like the shape and the material of the pens. I personally prefer the marker that has the brush compared to the marker that doesn't have the brush. In terms of ink quality and consistency, I decided to compare these markers with the Copic sketch markers that are known for being like the best markers in the market. We're testing them on mixed media paper, marker paper, Bristol paper, and normal printer paper just for fun, and so we can see how the ink reacts to each paper. Starting with the mixed media paper, this is kind of like a cardstock, so the paper is thick and it's supposed to hold paint as well, so it does absorb more ink from the markers than the other papers, and you don't really get a sharp defined stroke as the ink bleeds a little bit. The end result after it dried looks good, but you clearly see the brush strokes, and maybe because of the composition of this paper the color faded a little more than the other papers. This one is the marker paper. This is made for these kinds of markers and the brush strokes are more defined. The paper doesn't absorb the ink as much and it doesn't really bleed much at all, which is pretty impressive for how thin this paper actually is. I did find that after it dried, the ink color remained more vibrant than the mixed media paper, so you can see more of the pigment and the color looks more vivid. Now this one is Bristol paper, which is recommended for pen and ink. It's also a thicker kind of paper, similar to the mixed media one, but this one is way less absorbent. It's way smoother. It has like a lot less texture on the surface itself. It doesn't really let the ink bleed beyond the brush stroke too much. It allows the stroke to be more defined, which is great. I actually love the way the markers react on this paper because when it dries it kind of looks like paint. I find that we see less of the stroke as the ink kind of blends itself better. It reminds me of gouache a little bit. And lastly, we're going to use printer paper just for, I don't know why are we doing this? I'm joking, but this is just like, I already knew it was gonna be horrible, but I just wanted to show you for comparison what a really bad paper can do to your art. The ink bleeds a lot and it fades a lot after it dries, so you don't really see the pigment so much. So I only did this more like for comparison with a higher quality paper so you can see. And in summary, don't use printer paper, okay? And now we're gonna test how these markers do when they are blending. And I'm working with 3 or 4 tones of the same color, plus the neutral blending marker of each set. I'm also doing this with the Copics as well, just for comparison. And I'm using the marker paper for this. To start, my overall perception is that the Honolulu markers, the ones from the pastel set, blend really well. I think the transition is pretty smooth between the colors, even with the chisel tip. I think they blended pretty easily without much effort. I didn't have to go over the colors too many times, so I'm really finding these markers great so far. Now with the kaala markers, I'm starting with this limboard tip, and here we're working with much more vivid colors, so I feel like I needed an extra tone in between these two pairs of colors to get a better transition from the darker tones to the lighter tones. You can see that the two darker tones blended together really well and the two lighter tones blended together really well, but then there's like a division in between, so I feel like I needed an extra color here. I tried using the neutral blender marker and didn't have much luck with that, so I don't think that this is the ink quality that's not like blending well or anything like that. I just think I needed an extra tone, but overall they do blend well. But with the markers I have available for me in this set, this is the best I could get. And with the fine tip, this was the hardest one for me to blend because the tip is just not flexible at all, so like the release of ink on paper is just like, I'm just not really familiar with, and I don't know what I'm doing, and like the ink doesn't really go where I want it to go. But I'm also pretty sure this is not what this tip is designed for, so maybe it's kind of like unfair that we're doing this evaluation with this marker, so I don't know. Basically the ink blends really well, but the fine tip doesn't help. This is my conclusion. And lastly, we have the Copics for comparison. I had less colors to work with because I just can't afford a whole set of these markers yet, okay guys? I just buy individual ones whenever there's a sale at Michael's, so this is what we have for now. And I'm gonna be honest with you, the Copics feel really smooth to work with, and it's definitely more comparable with the Honolulu markers from Ohuhu because they both have brush and chisel, so I think they're direct competitors. And the kaala set markers are kind of like a different breed a little bit, so comparing the Copics with the Honolulu markers, I do find the Copics blend better, and especially with the brush tip, you can really see how smooth the transitions look, like you can barely see, right? It's a little bit better than the Ohuhu ones, but is it worth being like 10 times more expensive? I'm gonna say no, especially if you're just starting out and you're like trying to get into markers. I can't really justify the price tag when you get this good of a quality with cheap markers like the Ohuhu ones. I'm just being honest, okay? And I can say the same thing about the colors. Of course, this pastel set is made only of pastel colors. When you look here on plastic, they look a little bit more vibrant than they usually are on paper, and I love that about alcohol markers. The colors seem more natural than what you get with other materials and other kinds of markers, so I really appreciate these markers. They're really cool, and I was personally a little bit skeptical when I got them, especially because 96 colors seem like a lot. Like, do I need that many pastel tones? But I am surprised with how well thought out the colors are, and you can actually do a lot with just this set. If you're not so much into the pastel tones, Ohuhu has 320 colors of these types of markers, so you have an incredible range and you can do a lot with them. The one thing I didn't really like was the way the markers are organized in this bag. I didn't really understand the logic, and when I was testing the markers and coloring the swatches, it was really hard for me to find each color, so I kind of reorganized visually for me, so I kind of separated it by colors. Yellows. This is more complicated than I thought. But then there's not enough pinks. I'm very confused. I don't know, guys. I done my best, okay? Now, speaking of the kaala series, the colors are really intense and beautiful. I'm not the biggest fan of the bright colors, but you know, this is an illustration set, so I know this is really useful for most people. You can buy them in different sets. They have an illustration set, which is the one we tested, a landscape set, skin tones, and basic tones. The downside for me really is not having a brush tip, but the Honolulu series has it all, in my opinion. I really think the fine tip can be useful. I just don't have that much experience with it, so it's hard to talk about it. Now, to wrap this video up, this is the price of each of these markers individually in early 2023. So yeah, my overall review is really positive for Ohuhu. Both sets are really high quality. I really like the ink, I like the colors, I like the way they're designed. I found that the nibs are really great, and I can see myself using these markers a lot from now on. I actually was really skeptical with this brand before because I saw them on Amazon, but I saw how how cheap they were, and I was like, nah, there's no way these are good, you know? So I'm actually really impressed, and I do recommend them for you guys. If you have different opinions, or if you agree with me, or if you think this review was horrible, or you want me to review something else, let me know in the comments. And this is it for today, guys. I'll see you again in my next video. Bye!